Many times I've heard this phrase and I understand where the logic comes in, but I think what's often overlooked is how that creates chaos in the future. Hi guys, I'm Alexandria and I make videos on healthy eating and how to make it enjoyable and sustainable. So for today's video, we're going to be sharing an unpopular opinion. I've gone back and forth on creating this video because it's like I understand why health people say this, but it literally irks me. I don't agree with it. I don't believe it. And maybe you guys will agree, maybe you won't. I think when you're in your 20s, it probably works out. But when you hit your 30s, things hit differently. Things hit differently. And the line that I'm talking about is when people say that there is no such thing as good and bad foods. Yes, there is. I understand the purpose of going and saying that statement of there's no good and bad foods because it creates an unhealthy relationship with food. But I think when they say that there's no such thing as a good or a bad food, it does create an unhealthy relationship with food because you don't know how to set boundaries on what is actually something that you should be eating and what you shouldn't be eating. And you can't say there's no such thing as good or bad foods when we constantly see those video correlations of instead of eating this, instead of eating this, eat this. I'm like, there is such a thing as good and bad foods then because you're telling me not to eat this, but I should eat this. But if there's no such thing as good or bad foods, shouldn't I be able to eat it all? Like, that's the logic that I put on it. So why I would say that it is something I disagree with, because again, it doesn't give you any correlation of then what is good food and then what is bad food. When I think of good and bad foods, it's more so of just like looking at the ingredients in my food. And I think when it's more so centered on there is such a thing as good and bad ingredients, I think that helps narrow it down, because a lot of these companies, when it comes to like these foods and new foods that are advertised to us, and it's just like this whole intuitive thing of like, if you feel like eating a donut, eat a donut. If you feel like eating this, eat this. And I'm like, you know what? I understand your point, because then it doesn't create an unhealthy relationship with food of why you shouldn't be eating it. But then it also leaves you susceptible to all these marketing food companies that are out there, because when these food marketing companies are creating new types of foods, they're not chefs in the kitchen thinking of like great food to make for the entire population. They're finding ways of creating the perfect balance between salt, fat, and sugar to make you addicted on it. And when you eat these foods, it tastes good, but it's doing nothing for your body because it's not meant to do something good for your body of feeding you actually nutrients. It's made to keep you addicted to it so that way you could keep buying it. Like, these are not chefs behind these types of foods. These are chemists. So it's like literally paying attention to what you're actually putting into your body to then be like, nah, this is not a food that I should be eating. Like, especially like those like processed snacks and stuff like that. Like, I used to love those like oat bars. I don't really remember what they're called, but I used to eat those like religiously. They're so good. But then I looked at the ingredients in it and I'm like, this isn't something that I should be putting in my body. Our body mainly consists of eating fat, protein, carbohydrates, and some sugar, but not over excessive amounts of sugar. A lot of people cut out sugar. I think the way the world is, when you look at anything on packages, it contains some type of sugar. And I think when people are like not eating sugar, I would love to know what you eat, because when you look at everything on the back of a package, even things you don't think would have sugar in it, they have sugar in it. And especially when we say there's no such thing as good and bad foods, but yet everyone's like cutting out sugar. I'm like, make it make sense. Personally, I feel like when it comes to certain ingredients, especially when there's like new things on the market, I'm like, food is food. Like, we shouldn't be like creating all these different types of weird processed foods. That's not food. So those are bad because that does nothing for your body. They're just making that to make you addicted to it. So what I started to just realize is that paying attention to what is actually in your food is what you could justify on saying what is good food and what is bad food. Because when we just say there's no such thing as good and bad foods, it just makes it easier for marketers to come knocking on our door and feeding us these things, and then we like them so much and we're addicted to it, and then we're trying to maintain our weight, we're trying to lose weight, we're trying to be our healthiest self, but we like this food so much we can't stop, and then we're not realizing it that This was created in a lab. This was created to make us addicted. This was created to make us wanting to keep having more. High fructose corn syrup. Anything with high fructose corn syrup, I avoid, because I know when I eat it, I tend to overeat it. Anything that I've liked of snack that had high fructose corn syrup in it, I tend to not be able to stop myself from eating it. So if I see that, that's an ingredient I just don't, me and it just, we don't get along. We're not messing with each other. Instead of just deciding that there's no such thing as good and bad foods and intuitive eating, instead pay attention to what's actually in your food. What are you actually eating? And look for things that have better and more natural ingredients in it. You don't have to cut it out of your life completely. Like, I'm a chips person. I love me some chips. I don't really eat it as often just because it's like I've changed my taste buds like over time that I don't crave the chips anymore. And I think that's what a healthy eating like journey should be. It's not just swapping from this to swapping from that, because you're still craving that. Like, you still haven't resolved like just slowly transitioning out of it. So what I did when I first was like eating chips, I was addicted to Lay's. Like, I loved me some Lay's, but instead of eating that, then I would get the kettle cooked. To me, kettle cooked sounded like it was healthier. So I got kettle cooked, and it had like paprika and actual like things that I recognized instead of like a long list of shit I don't know. So then I started eating that. Then from kettle cooked, then I would, I found like these siete chips, which, oh my God, if you are a chips girl, if you are a chips person, my God, siete, that brand, their chips, they're so good. Look at the ingredients on those chips comparative to like the standard chips. Look at the ingredients. Tell me which ingredient sounds better to you, because then I just proved my point on this video. I think when we say there's no such thing as good and bad food, it creates confusion, and it also helps companies to be able to grab onto that and use that to their advantage. So if you want to say that there's no such thing as good and bad foods, fine. I would say think of it in terms as there are such things as good and bad ingredients. Because when you say there's no such thing as good and bad ingredients, then you're going to notice certain patterns of certain foods that tend to have certain negative ingredients and other types of foods that have better ingredients. So I enjoy a good tiramisu, and there is certain Whole Foods that has like these little mini tiramisus, and I love them because they're made of like dates and of cocoa, and I think it's cacao or cocoa, I don't really know, but they're made of like the most healthiest types of ingredients that you could have. And so it's just like, I'm not going to sit there and be like, tiramisu is bad, but I am going to look at what's in my tiramisu to be like, yeah, that's probably not the greatest of doing. If you're someone who likes sweets, instead of going to a supermarket and getting it processed, get it from an actual bakery, because they're using actual real ingredients. And you also have to think of food as good and bad, because you have to realize, okay, I can't eat this all the time. Like, you can't live off of donuts. You can't live off of chips. Like, your body will shut down. Like, your body needs actual nutrients. So if we're saying that there's no such thing as good and bad foods, that means our bodies can survive off of anything. But the way that we are as a population is like, a lot of our bodies are inflamed. A lot of our bodies are not working the way that they should, because we're putting stuff in it that's not beneficial to it. And the way I tend to think about it is like, if you give your car, like, I don't drive. I should be learning to drive. I live in Florida. I need to learn how to drive, but I came from New York. But it's been 4 years. It's time to get that license. But when I think about a car, I've constantly heard that you have to put the right type of oil in it, or your car will fuck up. And that's the same way I think about it as a human being. Like, if you don't put the right fuel in it, your body's not going to operate properly. If you don't put the right fuel in your car, you will mess up your car. So the same way we tend to put the right things in our like plants and give them the nutrients, give them the soil, and give them the proper stuff that they need to thrive, the same way we tend to take care of our car and get the right oil for it, the same way we have to do that for our bodies and give ourselves the right actual type of stuff, and not say that there's no such thing as good and bad food. Because if you put the wrong oil in your car, you're now fucking up your car. And especially, it really triggers me because I work in healthcare. Like, I've worked in healthcare since I was 25. And I've worked with patients where I've seen how much their life changes over time. And I've seen how patients could go from having one thing wrong with them and having one doctor to then like a couple of months to years later to then having 5 different providers. Like, who wants to spend their time going to all these different doctors, especially with healthcare now? Like, who wants to do that? So because I understand how that could compound over time, and now being in my 30s and seeing the transition of when I tried to do that whole like intuitive thing in my 30s and my body was like, absolutely not. I stand by what I say. And I stand by the fact that I think saying that there's no such thing as good and bad foods does probably more harm than good, because it prevents the idea of being able to set boundaries on what is actually something that you should be eating to fuel your body, rather than what is something that you should be more cautious of how you are eating it. So that is my unpopular opinion. Definitely let me know if you disagree. So maybe I'm understanding it from a different point of view, because that could be a thing. I'm definitely open to healthy discussion in the comments, you know, but I understand why I feel the way that I feel. And there's definitely been things where I didn't agree with it before and then switched my mind because of the different point of view that I had. So even if you're like, you know, you're a doctor or a dietitian or a nutritionist, like that would be cool if you comment, because I wanted to be a nutritionist, but I suck at science. I love science, but I suck at taking tests. Yeah, like let me know what your standpoint is on this, because that's just been something that has really been grinding my gears of hearing, and has been frustrating of hearing, because I don't really agree with that statement. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video.